Hello. Yo, yo. Okay, this is going to be a full-length guide for the Ky'veza boss on question mark difficulty for Mage. I'm gonna cover generalities, like non-spec specific stuff at the start, and then I'm gonna be going into more spec-specific details later on. So if you don't care about other specs, you can feel free to skip to, whatever Mage spec you want to do it on. If you don't care and you just want to kill the boss, I would recommend doing it on Arcane. I felt that that was the easiest and safest. Frost is kind of limited in being able to do damage as safely because you don't have as good cooldown lineups as Arcane does. And Fire feels really squishy and punishing, especially because you're losing access to cauterize, basically. Although it does handle the movement better, so, every spec has its pros and cons, basically. And if you want full-length videos of every kill, which I'm not really going to show because this video would be 30 minutes long, they're uploaded on my channel, so feel free to check that out. Okay, generalities. So, regardless of your spec, you're going to want to run this class tree, which I'll show on the screen now. Note that this heavily talents into a lot of our self-mitigation by dropping Ice Cold and everything leading up to it, as well as most of our other non-essential utility. The key for every mage spec to keep in mind is that this fight is not a race. If you ever have to choose between doing mechanics and doing damage, you should do mechanics every time, because you can easily have kills, around the 10-minute mark, and still play very safe. This includes just sitting in block during some of the portal sucks, so don't be afraid to do that, unless you're in like a major cooldown set, in which case you should probably use something else. Also, regardless of spec, you're going to pop everything on pull, so Lust, Pot, major cooldown, and try to do as much damage as possible in the beginning. You want to blink after 2 dagger lines, and you should easily be able to dodge the rest while still doing the majority of your damage. Where you pop your second damage pot is going to be kind of spec specific, but it's generally around the end. Another thing that helps me a lot was going into my graphics settings and disabling anti-aliasing. This lets you see the red outlines whenever clones are about to charge, which makes the massacre mechanic much easier. Although, the way I learned to do the fight was just watching for the blue light when the clones spawn and keeping track of which clone is about to charge and which clone just spawned. Getting into mitigation, regardless of your spec, you will have access at a baseline to alter time, mirror images, barrier, G-invis, ice block, and displacement, which heals you. A lot of people don't know that. You also want to set your brand to healer so that he drops the healing potions on the ground, which we'll be making heavy use of. In general, you want to watch where these healing potions get dropped and pick them up right before a portal suck or massacre so that you have a rolling heal on you while the damage is going out. Mage is kind of difficult to do this fight on because you only have one way to really recover health, which is alter time. So the only way to get really good sustain is to keep this heal rolling on you at all times. There's not a lot of great times to use shifting power on this fight, so try to use it at the end of a massacre when all the clones have spawned in, so you're kind of preventing any visual clutter. I found that shifting comes up a lot of times at the start of a massacre, but if you use it right at the start, you can start to lose track of which clone spawned when and end up dying. And finally, I would advise avoid hitting your CDs right before a shuffle mechanic. Some specs have really bad lineups where if you're not careful, you can hit buttons right before the boss goes immune, and you can be sitting without cooldowns for a long time, which can, artificially increase the length of your fight and make it much harder to live at the end. Also, I tried to avoid hitting cooldowns during Dark Massacre, unless I was extremely confident in handling the mechanic. Mage has a ton of fluff visuals when we use our cooldowns, which can make it really hard to see the clone spawning. Especially Frost was a huge perpetrator of this. If you hit all your cooldowns, you're going to see giant comets and meteors and shit, and like big explosions on the ground, and you're not really going to be able to see clones come out. Okay, from here, I'm going to go into spec-specific things that help me kill the boss. Feel free to skip to whatever spec you want to kill it on if that's all you care about. I'm going to be going to Arcane first. Okay, so Arcane was the spec I actually initially progged the boss on. It took me about 4 hours to kill it, and in my opinion, this is the easiest to kill the boss on. The first thing that I really liked was after the first round of mechanics, you're always going to have your big burn right after the shuffle phase. So you want to evo right as, you can see it here, you want to evo right as the clones finish, and then click, and then start your big burn. And this is ideal because we get a lot of time to do free damage here. She's not really doing anything. so you can basically do your entire big burn before the daggers. Arcane suffers from a lack of big movement, so this is ideal because, you know, we get to do a lot of damage here. Just make sure you blink after 2 dagger lines go down and you should be able to dodge the rest. One thing to be really careful of when playing Arcane is the missiles will make you face the boss when you cast them. So absolutely, if you can help it, do not use missiles during the massacre. You're going to face away from the clones and die. It can be kind of hard to develop this muscle memory, but just, you know, be present. Once you get to execute phase, the boss is like going to melt extremely fast, which is really nice because this is when the damage ramps up. So save your combat pot for the execute, and you can easily chunk her for a huge portion of health and make the fight a lot faster. Arcane was the fastest that I did it on, although that was probably because my Arcane set was, you know, the most eye level. The last tip I have for Arcane is to be really proactive with your barrier. The reason that Arcane is so good defensively here is your barrier gives you 25% magic DR for as long as it's on you, and a lot of the damage that she does is magic. So make sure that you are using barrier, you know, before the suck, before the massacre. And this also applies to your mass barrier, which you can basically use as a second barrier once every 2 minutes, or 3 minutes now. Yeah, so just try not to greed damage and you should be able to easily kill the boss with Arcane. Okay, going into Frost now. Frost was an extremely consistent spec for me because I never really felt in danger to dying to ticking damage or melees. Frost has a lot more defensives than Arcane, so you can play a lot safer generally. But it definitely suffers from being immobile, and it definitely suffers from not having as good cooldown lineups as Arcane does. You're going to have Icy Veins up sometimes at really bad times, which is going to cause you to use cooldowns during really dangerous parts or have to save them entirely. The big draw of Frost for me was Cold Snap, which gives you another barrier and block every 5 minutes. Combining this with your other defensives basically means you have a major defensive for every set of portals, which makes everything feel really safe. You're also able to do your full rotation during massacres because nothing's going to turn you towards the boss to cast. So try to save a lot of your instant casts so you can slowly back away from the clones while hitting the boss, and you should be able to do as much damage as you can during this phase. Finally, keep an eye for when the shuffle mechanic is coming out because you don't really want to waste your Veins right beforehand. Veins is a surprisingly long cooldown, so even if there's like 30 seconds until the shuffle mechanic, you know, you might want to save it just because you want to get full value out of that cooldown. That's pretty much it. I spent the least amount of time fighting this boss as Frost. That was probably because I already progged it as Arcane, but nothing really felt like I had to relearn anything. Frost was very consistent. If you don't play Mage at all and are just looking to kill this boss on Mage, I would actually probably recommend playing Frost because it's the easiest to pick up and play, and even though it's pretty immobile, you know, you can still get a lot done, and it's very, very safe. Okay, finally Fire. For me, Fire was by far the most challenging way to beat the boss. It basically combines the drawbacks of the other specs in that you have a lot of bad cooldown timings where you're forced to hold or use combust during really dangerous mechanics, coupled with the fact that you're very squishy and don't really have a lot of access to those, you know, chunky defensives that the other specs have. You're also using a really haste-heavy build, probably, so you don't have a lot of the versatility that Arcane would have either, leading you to just be taking a lot more damage in general. Additionally, Cauterize is completely useless. It will proc if you die, but anytime you go below 10%, she's going to reaper you anyway, so it's basically useless. In general, as Fire, I would say you need to make heavy use of the brand potions. Keep an eye out at all times for where he drops them, and you want to burn movement like blinks to pick them up right before a suck or a massacre. Even with barrier and mirrors, you're going to feel in danger during a lot of the later sucks without 3 stacks of heal rolling on you. So definitely make sure you're present and keeping track of where those health potions are dropping. There's a couple times where you want to make sure not to combust right before a mechanic. In general, if you're about to combust, just check timers and make sure you have more than 15 seconds before the next shuffle, or you're going to be without combust for a long time, which really sucks. It's going to artificially inflate your fight a lot. That happened to me, and I ended up having like a 10-minute kill time. It takes practice, but you should get good at doing your combust rotation during the massacre mechanic. Nothing is going to turn your character to cast, so you should be able to get a full burn off while doing this mechanic, and your rotation is very simple. You're basically hitting 2 or 3 buttons at all times, so, you know, keep the massacre foremost in your mind, and then kind of subconsciously do your rotation. Fire had a lot of variance in how much damage I was doing, so don't get discouraged if a pull looks really bad early on. My actual kill was pretty long, but sometimes I was on track to kill like minutes earlier than this. And finally, try to make heavy use of Scorch so you're still doing damage while moving. One thing Fire does do is it's a very mobile spec. It's much more mobile than Frost or Arcane, so you should be doing damage all the time. That's basically it. Remember, the fight is really long and really mechanics heavy, so your rotation should always be secondary in your mind when you're playing. Blink out of lines when you think you're in trouble. Keep track of clone spawns. Make sure that you're watching health potions on the ground. Sometimes they do despawn, but most of the time you should be able to pick them up whenever you want. And always know which defensive you're pressing on the next suck. If you go into a suck without having a defensive in mind, you're gonna get lost, and you're gonna probably either use too much or use not enough. Fire, for me, felt like I needed to greed just barely as much as I could, because any more greed and I would die, and any less greed and I would run out before, you know, the last few sucks. And yeah, don't feel like discouraged if you're not progging either. This fight is the same for the entire duration, so once you can do one full rotation, you basically know the whole thing. I got my first 50% pull like a few hours in, and then within an hour the boss was dead. So good luck, especially if you're attempting this week 1.